Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Inspirate Business, the show that's here to inspire you, to empower you, and to enlighten you. And today we have someone who I look up to, someone who is an aspiration in so many ways, a radio personality. People would understand that they would listen to the voice for many a day, speaking to leading personalities, leading politicians, influencers around the world. Somebody who is on a stage as an MC, as a program director for so many different organizations, and who's rubbed shoulders with some of the greats of this country, and somebody who I know is so passionate about this country of ours. His brand, I believe, is Champion South Africa. And on our hot couch, we call it, is none other than Ashraf Garda. Welcome, Ashraf, to the Inspirate Business Show.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for allowing me the opportunity to speak my business to your audience.
Yes, it's quite interesting that normally we have Ashraf on this chair and you have a guest. So it's quite an honor actually to have you there. I mean, after the show, you can give me your critique. I know you do a lot of that as well, which because you've had so many years of experience, right, Ashraf? On radio, on TV. I know you have your own show now. You do something with the Mail and Guardian.
Well, we do something. Yeah, I do a Twitter Space, and that's audio only, of course, right? So I mean, I do multiple things post my career with SAFM or SABC, where I did maybe linear things there. Now it's multiple things, multiple platforms, and I think the digital world has opened it up. That do not be linear. Don't think you can only do one thing.
Yes.
You can actually do that, and you can go broader. And that's where I am. Yeah.
And we'll be talking a lot about the space, the media space, and where is it going to? I mean, I think you can share so much of insight as to the different trends. I mean, you've been in the industry for how many years now?
Well, I haven't counted, but I think it's probably about 20 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Without counting, yeah. So
Malcolm Gladwell talks about anyone as a specialist must put that 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
I think you definitely have got the 10,000 hours.
I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah.
So, Ashraf, tell me, I know some of the commonalities that we have. I know we have a passion for football, for sport. I know you come from a family that's very sporting oriented. I mean, the Gardas are known. Your uncles, your family have written books around it. So where did it all start? Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Fitas,
right.
Fitas, Freedom, Page View. That's you can pick the three, right? But Fitas for me is the most common word.
Yes.
And which, as you know, is like a kilometer from Portsburg, but also a kilometer from the SABC, which I think is interesting because that's where you'll end up and spending so much of your life. Yeah.
Good. And I mean, at that time, Fitas, I mean, I've seen some of the pictures. It was such an amazing community. Right? Before people were moved, then part of the Group Areas Act. So this was like Joburg's version of District 6.
Well, in fact, District 6, Sapphire Town, Fitas have commonality in the sense that people were displaced because of the injustice of the Group Areas Act. They were trying to enforce that. So, I mean, that's happened across the board, right? So that's where I've come from. But we were kicked out when I was 12 years old, so I was a lightie.
Okay.
And then we moved on. But I mean, you certainly remember those times. And let me just say this before we move on. I think, when people say that was the good old days, well, I'm going to disagree with that completely. Because what does good old days mean? Does good old days mean that you're forced to live apart? Does good old days mean that people are black live on the one side of the street and the whites live at the bottom, and that's the good old days? Like, sometimes we need to stop and think, what are we actually saying? There were elements of Fitas that was marvelous in spite, not because of, in spite of the injustice of apartheid and the Group Areas Act. So that means people were able to rally around each other in spite of government hoping that you do otherwise. Okay? But there were many, many problems. And I think that the biggest issue, besides the obvious black-white issue, was your inability as a people to be upwardly mobile. That means the system institutionally prevented you from thinking bigger. And how can that ever be the good old days? But within that, there was a rich mixing of cultures within Fitas, a great sporting community and a trading community as well. I was born on 14th Street, which someone said, what is 14th Street? I said, that's Sandton City. If you think about it in those years, right?
Those were all the
yeah, I mean, that's where the big traders were always something that was born on that street and lived there. And that's what it was, yeah.
Yeah, I have an uncle, you may know Joe Cara.
Yeah, of course.
The Caras,
yes.
I mean, his father was, I think, a trader there, and then they went on to become quite a successful apparel manufacturer, you know, Jane Milano.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Caras were my uncle's married to one of the sisters in Canada.
Yes.
And therefore, I mean, we have common, when I see people like Firoz Kachalia, we have common cousins. And we played together as lighties, you know, on the streets outside their house and in 14th Street because they had this flat and the business and the flat upstairs. So, yeah.
So your political affiliations, I mean, what comes out very strongly is when I assess your life and just what you're doing as well, is that there's this exceptional passion, love for this country. There's also the strong, you're in tune with this global world that we're living in, with, you know, the politics of the day. The politics of South Africa, you know, we just offline were talking about, you know, our issues with the ANC. I mean, we all grew up as like struggle credentials or affiliated to that, and then it's quite sad to see how the great movement has waned in these last few years. So is this where that political affiliation has come from?
I mean, yes and no. I'm politically aware, but right. I've never been a political activist in that sense. And I can't accepting. I was probably locked in a jail for a day for protesting at student politics at school. Yeah. But I mean, you know, there are people who've done 1,000 things more than us. No, but I was always politically aware around the issues of injustice, right? And that injustice, not just even as a South African, even as a person of the Muslim faith who understands the role of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that to say if that's the role model and if he who follow his sunnah, then what is his sunnah? And for example, how can it ever be possible that if you're following his sunnah, you can be a racist? That doesn't mean we don't have elements of racism within us. We all do, sadly so. But you can't outly say, like, you know what, these people or this community or this jat or this, like, come on, stop it. So that inspiration is not so much from the politics of the country, accepting that as a country you want to understand that you had to move away from apartheid, which is wrong, but also being inspired by the Prophet Muhammad and his social justice plan. And I mean, just to touch on very lightly, because we can move on, the point that we spoke about off air, it is sad to say that where we are as a country and how important, say, Alex Ferguson was to Manchester United Football Club and what that meant to millions of people around the world, and what happened to Manchester United after Alex Ferguson, you can mirror that with what happened to South Africa and the ANC as the ruling party after the Mandela era and the influence of that golden generation. So you mirror both. There's a clear decline, and we're paying the price for both of it. United fans are paying the price for not winning anything, but more importantly, because that's just football, as a country, as a country that was mid-table, emerging into hopefully challenging as a champion nation, which is something I talk about often, but now we are moving into the relegation zone, if you can get it.
And we'll talk a lot about, you know, what you're doing as champion South Africa. I mean, that I think for our viewers will be amazing, because what we're all about as the Inspirate Business Show is those that are passionate, are doing amazing work in this country, and they're from different you know, facets of our society. And I know you're doing this, and I know you're bringing out those champion South Africans to create a champion nation. Yeah. And we'll talk about that. But you know, we've come close to the end already of the first segment, interviewing the famous Ashraf Garda on our hot couch. And Ashraf is talking all things sport. He's rearing in Fitas, having been affected by the Group Areas Act, you know, been moved. And we'll talk. By the way, where did when you moved out of that at the age of 12, where did you actually move to?
We moved to Lens, Lenasia.
Okay, is that where most people had to then
Yeah,
move?
but I mean, for us, historically, our entire family, Fitas Volksburg is our hood. That's where we are. Then as soon as we could, we came back to, Mayfair or Homestead Park. And I mean, that's where we've been. Yeah.
So you schooled then in Lenasia?
In fact, bit in Lenasia and even for a year or two in Rudaport, which will resonate with you.
Okay.
So there were lots of Rudaport names like guys like Chuchikaji and Blom's Nanabai. And those are guys that we were all chummies
and
together.
That school again was quite a school. That Rudaport High School.
Yeah, very much so.
We've come to the end of segment 1. We'll, after the break, discuss this whole Rudaport and the likes of these icons that Ashraf then rubbed shoulders with. And let's then understand what Ashraf is doing in terms of championing South Africans and this passion for building a winning nation. Welcome back to Inspirate Business, where we are being intrigued by a very famous personality, Ashraf Garda. And Ashraf has been talking about his rearing in the Fitas area. This is in the height of apartheid. And he said something very interesting. You said, and most of us kind of, we wax lyrical about the glorious past. And, there's such an important concept. It says that, live in the now. Yes, the past was the past. It has brought us to where we are. We can't deny it. There's obviously beautiful aspects of it. I know you touched a little bit about it, grew up in the Rudaport area, and there's beautiful moments of it. This is where you develop who you are. But it's about the now and being aware. I think that's something that you brought up as well.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think it's interesting. We've just come out of Heritage Month and Heritage Day in South Africa, right? And I mean, here's an interesting thing about when we talk about heritage. I promise you, as I talk to you, people watching are saying like, "Oh, that's the clothing you wear, the food you eat, and the languages you speak." Heritage, if you look at the meaning, it says to inherit, right? So yes. What have we inherited from our forebears, okay?
Yes.
And it could be all those things, right? But the responsibility of the now is, okay, so what do you want your children and your children's children to inherit? And that goes directly, squarely with where I am at Champion South Africa to say, well, what about, of all the things they can inherit, what about them inheriting a champion nation? You get my point? And that means, therefore, repurposing yourself to say, if you want your children to inherit a losing nation, then there's certain things that you need to do, and they will get that, and they will live the lifestyle in a losing nation. But if you want them to inherit a champion nation, then forget government. They're one part of this whole cog. What are you going to do to ensure that you're giving your children the best opportunity to inherit a champion nation? And that's a call to action to each one of us personally.
But, you're saying something very interesting. Now, doesn't it require, because look, we've come from a past that is a very fractured past. Somebody mentioned that South Africa in many ways is suffering from PTSD, right? This post-traumatic stress disorder as a nation. Because you think look, what people went through, it was a brutal regime, the apartheid regime. Now, I know we can't be saying 28 years into democracy still blaming the past, right? But we can't ignore that many people are still broken. Families were broken because of it. So there needs to be a paradigm shift. A lot of even our cultural norms coming from societies that were isolated, there was beauty in it, but there's also limiting beliefs that were created.
I mean, there's no doubt about that, right? And I think you're right? That is what I said when I spoke about Fitas early on, that you can't just say the good old days when it actually limited your ambitions. How can that ever be good, right? So the challenge for South Africa, you're right. If we look back into the past, we are in a deficit as a country because of apartheid. But we can't be in a perpetual deficit because there are other countries and places who've had worse situations than us.
I mean, right? Rwanda is one,
Rwanda,
right?
I mean, I've been to Rwanda and, there's their period of genocide paralleled our first election, when we saw hope.
94,
in the
right?
same month, when we saw hope. 1 million people died, where they got people to kill the neighbors, inspiring people to dislike and to hate, to rise against that sort of hatred, right? And then the others. I mean, if you look at Singapore, which was part of Malaya or Malaysia, one of the small provinces, and then broke away, and look at where they are now. Meaning there are possibilities that these things happen. South Africa's problem right now is understand where we've come from, understand the deficit that's caused us, and I have to say that because you have to put it to like the buck stops where the buck stops with the ruling party, right? The ruling party's biggest problem, right, in the almost 30 years or 3 decades of governing South Africa is they've, never mind what they've said, they've appealed to a narrow section of society. So one of the problems with apartheid is they set the communities apart so that they can just look after a small section of the society.
Yes.
Now the ANC, unfortunately, you can say whichever way you want to spin it, right? They themselves, particularly through BEE, not affirmative action, that's broad-based affirmative action by nature, but BEE is not broad-based. In practical terms, it has been a vehicle to try and satisfy a narrow group. That's why I say apartheid. They've kept them apart, and we are paying the price for that because what has not happened in almost 3 decades, there hasn't been a leveling of society. And here's the thing that I often talk about. How do you know a country is transformed, right? How do you know a country is transformed is when a township looks like a suburb. So how many townships in South Africa in 3 decades that looked like townships those years now begin to emulate a suburb where you can't see the difference? And there are very few. There's Vilakazi Street, Soweto, think beyond that. The rest of it, townships look like townships and suburbs look like suburbs. So how do we elevate townships to look like suburbs so that we see one? Then we know we've transformed as a country. And sadly, we haven't done so. So we have to then question the decision-making of those in power, not those on the outside.
But you spoke about those glorious days, right? In that euphoria that was created in 94, between that period, 94 to 99, when Madiba, ran the country, and there was this whole aspect. I mean, you think of the World Cup, Rugby World Cup 95, where we brought this very fractured nation together. I mean, that Ellis Park final. You spoke of Marhum Chichi, who talks so. I know he used to share that experience at that final, and then of course even the soccer, right? When we won the African nations, and I mean, and we also are very passionate about sports. So I'm using that analogy because that actually builds a nation, right? I went now recently to the All Blacks game at the stadium in Nelspruit, and you've seen again that nation building, that one nation. How has that been lost? And because you say this, that it's
I'll tell you why it's been lost.
Yeah.
You see, I love sport, and yes, I also often use sporting analogies because they work, but they are also fleeting. So we must understand, Madiba wearing a Francois Pienaar jersey is a symbol, but it's not the real thing. Winning a World Cup in rugby is a symbol. Winning the African Nations Cup is a symbol, and I can move on through every other one since then. But they are fleeting moments. What do you do that can make something stick? What do you do to make something stick is to get someone in a township and get them to win their World Cup. So you see, for the rugby team, their World Cup is beating the All Blacks or beating England in the World Cup final, which the Boks have done now 3 times, right? But for a person in a township without water, what's your World Cup? Your World Cup is, can I get water?
Wow.
If they're living in a squatter camp, informal settlement, their World Cup is, can I actually get a home? And that part, and that's where the problem is. So there's been fleeting moments. We haven't been able to draw on the magic of those moments to say, can we give the magic to 60 million people?
How powerful is that? You talk about that World Cup for that person who needs water or that toilet. I mean, it's such an indictment on us that 28 years into democracy, we still have people right now that have to use pit latrines. We have, I mean, that shows that we are not that winning nation. We are not doing those World Cups that you talk about. That we're not implementing.
Yeah, and why we're not doing that is this part that we all have skills. I mean, the fact that you're sitting here, you have a certain skill, and I have a certain skill, and many people watching have certain skills, right? But how, and when I say we, I mean as a collective, outside the narrow Muslim community, but to the South African community, right? How do we use our skills to impact nationally? So what am I saying, right? I'm saying, how do you get to a situation where when you win, South Africa wins? So it happens in rugby, in soccer, in Olympic Games, in cricket, right? But the truth is, if you're a competent presenter and you do superbly, or you inspire people through Inspirate, right? Then your job can't be like, I'm doing it for myself. It must start impacting on the country. How does that change? So when you win, South Africa wins, and when South Africa wins, you win. Now the problem I have is too many people, not in our community, in our country, right? When they do well, they effectively do well for themselves, starting with the politicians, sadly so.
Of course.
And they're going all the way down. How do you make the link between personal success and national success? That is a primary goal that we actually haven't really truly set and embraced.
You know, there's a powerful concept which we taught, you spoke about, you know, the principles of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, of servant leadership. I mean, today there's books written about it. But what was it all about? He cared about his people, the ummah, humanity. And that's what you're talking about.
Well, yes.
Madiba, in many ways, I mean, if it was all about himself, he would have carried on serving. He served, he knew he served his purpose, but it was about giving. It was always about the people first. You say that is being lost, and that needs to be brought back. We've come to the end of segment 2, and here we're talking about building a champion nation, a champion South Africa, and championed by a wonderful guest we have in Ashraf Garda, who's so passionate. What I want to do is, immediately after the break, is let's get a little deeper into what that would mean. You know, we said fleetingly in the sporting field, as important as it is, has been this galvanizing of various communities that represent South Africa on the sporting field. That in itself is important, but there's a lot more to it, as Ashraf has spoken about. So let's get a little deeper into what that would mean after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate Business, the show that's here to inspire you, to empower you, and to enlighten you. And on our Red Hot Couch, we talk about, sponsored by Asia Collective out in Kramerville. We have none other than Ashraf Garda, someone who just in this last segment has been, and even in this first segment, has just been talking about South Africa and our past and what we need to be doing to become a winning nation. But what also comes out very strongly from the discussions we've had is this very strong Islamic ethos. You know, you spoke about your time growing up in Fitas, and you said, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about non-racism 1400 years ago. I mean, that famous last sermon of the Prophet, where he said, all nations, different, Arab is equal to a non-Arab, and black equal to white. That was non-racism. And I see that very, very strongly. And it's about galvanizing all the different segments of our society. And we use this analogy about sport because when I see that winning team, the Bafana team, what did it do? It had Mark Fish at the back, Neil Tovey at the back. Then you used a colored striker. Then you had this flair of our African players. It galvanized the skills, which are all different, the diversity. And you see that in our rugby team as well, right? Yeah. Now, are we not doing enough around that in terms of...
I think that's exactly the point. And this is where we are at Champion South Africa. It's a project that we started. In fact, myself and Zaid, who you'll be very familiar with, my son, it's an idea we first had a few years ago. And the goal is to build South Africa into a champion nation, right? So just think about the United Nations Secretary General, right? Whoever that person is one day, not now. standing up and saying the trophy, and I'm thinking of a trophy,
Yeah, right.
and the trophy to the winning nation, not the winning rugby team or football team, the winning nation for this year goes to South Africa.
Wow.
And then gives it to our president, him or her, right? And she or him receives it, okay? Now, that's the image that I have in my mind, where I visualize what could happen. Now, that can't happen now. To get to champion level status could take another 30 years if we get our act together.
Yes.
Right? We've already missed a 30-year boat, right? But being a champion nation means what? Now, we don't have to spend too much time about definitions, but in essence, a champion nation means, when we talk about the rights of citizens, check, it works, okay? The rights of the diversity of the people, it checks out, right? High quality, the best quality of education in the world, checks out, right? Best quality of sport, excellent. Business excellence, safety excellence, no crime excellence, religious diversity excellence. I can go on, and we know those things, okay? That's what we need to aim for, right? So our job as Champion South Africa right now is just the first part. We want to inspire champion thinking. So this entire conversation, as I'm talking to you, is really slanted towards the audience saying, can I inspire you to think as a champion, not to think as a mid-table human being? Because if we get 10 people or 1,000 or 1,000,000 people or even more who start switching on and thinking as being champions, meaning best in class, because I love the word champion. Champion means best in class, but championing someone means to strive for a greater cause. So once you are best in class as a champion, how then do you strive to champion a cause? And there's no greater cause for us here than championing South Africa.
Of course.
It's the cause, but be the best and then strive for that. So our job as Champion South Africa is to inspire champion thinking, to get people switched on to think differently, number one. Then to identify champions currently in our space, because when you identify champions, we inspired by them.
There's
all
an aspirational
sectors of society, like, that's the person. From Islamic point, you say, forget the Prophet, besides the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you say, what about Bilal and his role? So we're inspired by that. So like that, identify champions, amplify champions, be inspired by those champions, and hope that those champions then inspire other people to say, well, I can be like that Oki. I want to be like that Oki because I like what he or she are doing, right? So, I mean, that's our goal, right? And we talk about a phrase we use often. We say, champion people build champion nations, right? Which means to build a champion nation, you need people who are champions. So what are we doing in essence as Champion South Africa? We are in the business of building champions, to build the champions needed to build the champion nation. And we don't do it ourselves. Ours is just inspiration, collaboration at different levels of societies. For example, something very topical. In this month, right, Thuli Madonsela's Social Justice Project comes up annually. And last year, the winner of the Social Justice Champion was Imtiaz Suleiman from the Gift of the Givers. Right?
Of course.
This year, there'll be a new winner, right? I'm in a privileged position. I'm on the selection committee to choose. We did it last year as well. We'll do it again. But I'm also part of one of their Social Justice Champions. So that gives you an example where what we do at Champion South Africa then feeds into other things, because the days of doing things alone is out. We have to collaborate and co-create and not see people in opposition, but see abundance for every one of us.
Yes. Now, I know, you've been doing this for quite a while, and what was very interesting is, and maybe share that story a little bit, because we all know of it. I didn't know that you played a key role in it, was, Hashim Amla, who we talk about this breaking of paradigms, cultural paradigms. When he came onto the scene, when we think about it, number one, he is a Muslim who represents Islam. He's got the beard, comes into a sport which has a different norm and standard. He breaks it in many ways, in a sense that, number one, we hear the stories of the dressing room where, and then the Proteas are sponsored by an alcoholic based company, I think the breweries, Casa Lager. He obviously, from his Islamic ethos, doesn't wear that. And that in itself kind of breaks a tradition and a norm. There's then the famous incident where I think it was Dean Jones as the commentator, then utters something off camera, and how he dealt with that bringing out the Islamic ethos. And I know you played a role in that, building that champion. How did that work?
So, I mean, at that time, just before he broke into the national team, he was still a provincial player. Myself and a few other people, and people you'll be familiar with, people like Uro Karlse and Tabiso Tema and Aslam Kota, amongst others, decided to get together with a plan of possibly starting a sports agency. So to cut a long story short, that only lasted 2-3 years. It didn't quite work out.
Okay.
But at that time, right, amongst the people we were identifying as low-hanging fruits, we'll look at black cricketers as a starting point to see who we can engage with. So we engage with people like Hashim and his brother Ahmed, and people like JP Dumini, who was already contracted to help people elsewhere, and Ashwell Prince. That's where we were. But Hashim then got on board, and we started managing. In the early days, remember, I was still a provincial cricketer at that time. But very quickly, he got elevated to the national team. So to cut the long story short, when he got elevated to the South African A team, not the national team, that was the first time he was presented with this problem of they wearing the Casa Lager logo. And as us being this agency called Boundary Breakers,
nice name, by the way.
Yeah, we then approached Cricket South Africa, right? Omar Henry, at the time the convener of selectors, and then Ghulam Raja, and then Gerald Majola, and then SAB. And I was involved in writing the letter that made the request. But to be fair, as a United Cricket Board at that time, I think they were very receptive, and they always were extremely receptive to that. And the second part, to accommodate Hashim, which I think, honestly, with all the nonsense that takes place in our country, appreciate that in our country.
Yes, that's very powerful.
We have it.
Yes.
We have it.
Yes.
And then, of course, with the Dean Jones thing, when Hashim came back to South Africa, because he was in Sri Lanka, as part of his management team, I literally spoke to him for about an hour when he arrived back, telephonically, myself here, he's in KZN, and we spoke about what's expected tomorrow, because I said, your terrorist jibe story is not a cricket story, it's a political story. And if people don't tell others where you are and you don't want to talk, your father is a doctor in a small town in northern KZN. It's the easiest thing for the newsrooms to camp outside the surgery tomorrow morning. It's going to happen. So the way you turn it around is you preempt. You say, Hashim would be willing to be interviewed. And we coordinated all of that.
Wow.
So the next day, he probably had about 20 interviews from South Africa, obviously, to radio, TV, to places like in the Caribbean, across the board. And we just preempted all of that. And that was our role. But I mean...
No, but I must say something to you, Ashraf. When you speak, and I'm getting goosebumps, because what was so powerful about that is that, we all talk about propagating in many ways, our deen as Muslims, right, to be examples. And what that did, that incident, as negative as it was at the time, and the way Hashim conducted himself and talked about his principles of justice and forgiveness, which is prophetic principle.
I think that's so important.
That changed a narrative. And it was at the time when there was this huge, which there still is, this whole Islamophobia and the whole terrorism aspect, because it was, I think, fresh out of, the 9/11 and, just soon after that. But that narrative, that impact, and in Australia, which is a pretty conservative society, what that did for Muslims was unbelievable.
I agree with you. And that's Hashim to his core. But that was what I think he said something like, I'll forgive Dean Jones because I want God or Allah to forgive me for my fault. So, end of discussion, isn't it? That's really what it is.
And that's building, there is, and the reason I brought that up is because you talked about building a champion nation and champion South Africans, because that's what builds the nation. And there is a practical example of the work that Ashraf does in terms of building champion South Africans. So on that very high note, we've come to the end already of this segment, and we'll see you after the break, where we'll get to the end of the show, the last segment, and let's talk a little bit about, again, building the South African nation. And also what I want to understand is, and again, comes out very strongly, I want to also discuss that experience of yours not too long ago, having gone for Hajj.
Yeah, five years ago.
Let's talk about that after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate Business. We have been through these last three segments with none other than Ashraf Garda on our hot couch. And we're talking so many intriguing aspects of this building a winning nation. And I guess it's not an easy thing, but can it be done? Of course it can. There are such pockets of excellence that Ashraf has spoken about. I mean, we were just, I was mesmerized by the story, the back story behind the Hashim Amla success, you know, and what was very powerful, and I think this is something that's a key aspect of our country. You know, you said when you dealt with the issue of Hashim not wearing the Castle Lager logo, the fact that SAB was so accommodating, that needed to understand why. I mean, that in itself tells you that we have a country, and not many countries have that.
Absolutely.
Right? Which is, and I think this comes again from that historic past and our constitution, which is a very accommodating. I mean, even from a religious perspective.
But I agree. I mean, and that is why it would be good to talk. I mean, happy to talk about the Hajj experience that I had.
Yes.
And just something. So maybe if I can.
Yeah.
So I mean, so to pick up on the issue of the World Cup, if winning a rugby or cricket World Cup is the World Cup highlight of a sportsman, and I'm saying building a champion nation should be the World Cup of all South Africans, in fact, right? And getting a house when you don't have a house is the World Cup of someone who's in a informal settlement. Then what is the World Cup of the believer? So the World Cup of the believer is the Hajj.
Is of course Hajj.
It's the World Cup of the believer, right? And I won't repeat what everybody knows. I mean, those things are obvious, right? That, you know, we went for 6 weeks. It was the most remarkable experience of my life, right? And not just the people that we went with.
Maroon Chichi was also with
us.
Yes,
Chichi was with us, and we had some great times and great visuals, as you may be aware of, right? But also, it was the ability to interact with other people, other cultures and other nations. Now, I have lots of thoughts out of the Hajj, right? But maybe two things I'll share with you very quickly. On the last day of the Hajj, when we were about to pelt at the Jamarat in Mina for the last time, Maulana Dawood Samson, who was heading up the group that we were involved in, he's like, and he asked everybody, like, who wants to stay here forever, you know? And just about everybody in the tent lifted their hands, like, we want to do that. So I didn't pick up my hand. So like, you don't want to stay here forever? Like, did you not have a good time? I said, in fact, I had a great time. It has been an incredible 6 weeks. Like, so why don't you want to stay on? And I said, because I have a country to build. Meaning that I'm inspired by the social justice mission of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm inspired by the Medina example of sharing and all those type of things. But my role is not served in Saudi Arabia. They don't need me. They don't need me. I have no purpose there besides performing a pilgrimage, right? My role and my purpose is to be inspired by that social justice model of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then say, okay, if you want to follow your sunnah, go and take it back to where you come from. And that's my role. So I said, I want to go home because I have a country to build. That's point one. Point two coming out of that was, and I mentioned Medina, because, you know, South Africa had this experience with the KZN riots last year, right?
Yes.
And we can debate who instigated what, but we've discussed it earlier. The society is fractured because of this incredible Gini coefficient between extreme wealth and extreme poverty.
Of course.
If everybody's equal and they've got nothing, they're chilled. It's this inequality that's the problem, and we have this massive inequality. So what do we do about it? Now, obviously, we want to have growth. People like yourself can inspire, so we say, let's do whatever. But in practical terms, as a Muslim, because we say we follow the Sunnah. Now, there's 1,000 things that make up a Sunnah, but very selective which Sunnahs we follow, right? So we all know this, that when the people of Makkah moved to Medina, being persecuted, well, number one, they were refugees. Just think about it. They were refugees. So when you knock refugees, be aware of who the refugee was. They were refugees. They were then taken in by the people of Medina, right? And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam suggested to people to say, can you share in half your wealth? So that was embraced. Maybe not by everybody, but by the majority.
Abu Bakr, I believe, he gave most of his
But the idea was like share in your wealth with people. And they did that. So that's a sunnah. So why am I saying that? In the South African context, what's your Medina model? If you gloat and glamorize just how incredible the people of Medina were and how they shared in their wealth, then how come we're not doing that? Now, I'm not saying we must share the wealth. No, we're too sainah, we're too stingy.
Yes.
I won't do it. Okay. But if you can't share literally in your wealth, can you do this next best thing? Can you at least do a skills transfer? So my point is, can each one of us, me and you and everybody else, actively find not people that we know, not our chommies, I'm talking about underprivileged people, and embrace them, not adopt, partner with family. If you change the position of one family, not by giving them a hamper, by uplifting that family, you change that entire family situation for at least 3-4 generations. Okay. Now, if you do that with a niyyah, to say that's the Medina example of sharing my wealth, which is my skills, right? Then you are uplifting society and you're doing your part in narrowing this gap between rich and poor. So, I mean, both of those things directly impact the South African society. Maybe the last thing for me for the Hajj is when I came back, we started a portal called That's My Hajj, right? Because and it's still open, and I'm open to others as well. One thing is people going for Hajj and being nostalgic about their Hajj, as I am as well. But the other part is, how do you link your Hajj with changing your country? So we set up a project called That's My Hajj, and I'm hoping somebody else can say, Ashraf, can I drive it for you? Because I can't drive it. I want someone else to drive it. So I want someone to say, can we drive it and then make the link between every year of the Hajj, right? And the alumni of that year. So let's say this current year,
Yes,
right?
yes.
The group of 2022 all gets together. Doesn't matter which group they're part of, right? They get together, say, in the name of 2022, right? This is what is our gift to South Africa for this year.
Right.
Next year, somebody else does it. That's why I'm saying, call it the That's My Hajj Foundation. So then what you're doing is, because we know if we say Hajjis are ambassadors for our community, they're actually ambassadors for the whole country, right? So if we then inspired by what happened on the Hajj, it's going to matter very little if it only impacts your own family. It must also impact the country, the same country that gives you the rights and privileges that you require. And the last thing on that one, you know, the Quran describes the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as rahmatul lil alameen.
Yes.
Now, I'm not a scholar, but I know enough that means a mercy unto the world.
Unto
right?
mankind.
It's plural.
Yes.
It's not South Africans and not Muslims.
Mankind.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So again, if the Quran describes him as that, that's the sunnah that the Quran has embraced him with, right? And if we say we want to follow his sunnah, the challenge to you and I in South Africa right now is like, how can you be a mercy unto your world? And your world is where? It's not Azadville, it's not Rudaput, it's not the Bukap, it's not Lens, it's not Fitas, it's South Africa. Can you be a mercy unto the world, being inspired by the model of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam?
You know, you've put a hell of a challenge. And you know, I am inspired just by what you said, and the viewers out there. I mean, I'm encouraging people. There's two parts which is actually linked. You know, you said as us giving back, you know, sharing skills. This Gini coefficient. How are we going to change this country if we all don't become these servant leaders? Exactly. We as Muslims have been given this example, as you mentioned. That's from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Well, you see, that's the point. I mean, we gloat about stories. We look at what happened to the people of Makkah who went to Abyssinia, Ethiopia. And we say, look at how that Abyssinian king gave them refuge.
A Christian, this is a Christian king. Yeah.
And then we don't give refuge ourselves.
Yes.
So we follow the sunnah. We say, that's fantastic. And we're not prepared to do squat about it ourselves. And I'm not saying I do it. I'm raising the consciousness to say, let's think different.
Now, you were saying something about Rwanda in '94 and how it has changed. And I know what they've done is an initiative. I know there's one initiative that they've done is on a Saturday morning, the Prime Minister or President is where everyone comes out and cleans the streets. Right?
There's community driven.
What because I would like to get down to some practical stuff, right, before we get to the end of the show. Maybe we put this out there. Maybe as Champion South Africa, we can get more volunteers to come on board, because this is a movement. You know, you've ignited or a spark that can create a whole movement. And maybe that's where, I know people are busy Mondays to Fridays, but maybe on a Saturday,
well,
right,
whatever,
where you give off your skills.
And you know what's the beauty part?
In your own little communities, wherever you are. You know, guys in Lenasia, link with the people across the road in Protea Glen, bring people in there, out in Woodbank, out in Cape Town. You know,
I'll tell you what the problem is, and all those are right, and many people are doing it already, okay? I asked a question the other day. I said, what is South Africa's USP? What's our unique selling point?
Yes.
People are battling with the answer, point one. Point two, I asked, what is your personal purpose? So if you ask me, what's my purpose is to champion people. That's my personal purpose. Then the corporate purpose is to champion South Africa. If you can see the distinction.
Gotcha.
So my purpose is to champion people. Now, you may have your own purpose. Maybe Inspirate will suggest that. But a purpose is not a job. The job must reflect your purpose. The purpose can't be, that's what I do. What's your purpose? What do you want to do with that job, right? But I asked the question, so that's your purpose. Now, what is South Africa's purpose? What's our national purpose? Now, in 1988, our purpose was obvious. Dismantle apartheid.
Yes.
Okay? To the people of East Germany, the purpose was obvious. Break the Berlin Wall, for example, right? What's our purpose now? Now, you don't have an answer. You're not expected to have an answer because nobody has an answer.
Yes.
But I am saying to you,
but we need to create that purpose.
We need to create the purpose. So
yes.
Personal purpose must link with national purpose.
Yes.
You see, your purpose must impact on national purpose. And the problem is that people are doing a lot of great things, right? But they don't actually know why they're doing it in terms of big picture. Now, if the big picture purpose is we want to change South Africa, and we're not giving that responsibility to government only, then can you see how your personal purpose impacts on national completely? And that's and that's a challenge to all of us. So yes. I'm saying to you from a Champion South Africa point of view, our job is to inspire champion thinking, or I should say, to inspire you to start saying, how can I be switched on? Do we have all the answers ourselves? No. It's open to everyone. People watching to say, drop us an email, Ashraf at championsouthafrica.coza, but we're available on all social media platforms, and let them find great innovative ways that they can say, can we run with this under the name of Champion South Africa?
And therein is a challenge to everyone out there, all our viewers, right? Connect with Ashraf. There's such excitement here. There's such practicality. There's examples. Ashraf spoke about that whole example around somebody that we all aspire to, Hashim Amla, and there's so many others that we can talk about. We've come to the end of the show, so of course we could even have another show with all this. But what is out there for you and I know I personally have been inspired by this year is that what is my personal purpose linked to that is an organizational purpose that is then linked to a country's purpose.
A national purpose.
And the one thing that comes out very strongly, which we have spoken about this on many other shows as well, is this inequality, which if we want to build a winning nation, we cannot have. We will end up really losing, and everybody will lose. So what we have to do is reduce this gap, and it needs
that's the challenge.
It needs skills development, it needs change of thinking, and we can create an abundant society where everybody can win. It's not about me at the expense of the next person. It's a winning nation where everybody is carried together. That we talk of Ubuntu. I am because of you.
Yeah, we are. Well, I mean, that is why, as we wrap up,
these are just your parting words.
When in the past I used to, as Champion South Africa in that role, besides the general media stuff, I would say I'm the founder or the chief visionary. And then it was my birthday in June, and I got a tweet from Professor Thuli Madonsela on my birthday, and she said, "Happy birthday, Champion Spotter." And in that moment, she defined unintentionally what my role should be. So when you get a lion spotter, you're a Kruger Park sighting spotter, or a train spotter.
You're the champion spotter.
I'm the spotter. So my job is to spot champions, but I want to make that your job as well. I want you yourself, and I want you watching to say, can you spot champions, identify talent in people, and raise them to the level that they do become champions, right? And then let them champion great causes. So I'm the champion spotter. Can you be a champion spotter as well?
That's it. On those very powerful words, can you be a champion spotter? You've put that challenge to me. I surely am going to try and do that and implement that. I hope we have been doing it by bringing in people like yourselves who are doing amazing work. And now that's the challenge for each one of us, to build this winning nation. It all starts with each individual. I think the days of complaining about leadership and so on, we are all leaders in our own right. On that powerful note, be the champion spotter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.